All right, this is Chapter 6, or Unit 6, Eukaryotic Cells. Okay, so we've just finished, prior to Christmas, studying the basic introduction to cells, and included with that was, we talked a little bit about prokaryotic cells. Well, in this unit we're going to talk about the cells of organisms that we are much more familiar with, and those are eukaryotic cells. Now, like prokaryotes, all organisms that we call eukaryotes also have a cell membrane, cytoplasm, ribosomes, and DNA in their cells. So eukaryotes are organisms whose cells are what we call eukaryotic cells, and they have some similarities with cells of prokaryotes in that they have these cell membrane, cytoplasm, ribosomes, and DNA in their cells. These are common structures that we find in all cells, whether they are prokaryotic cells or eukaryotic cells. Now, unlike prokaryotes, all eukaryotic cells also have a nucleus, and this is really the defining characteristic of a eukaryotic cell, is that it has a nucleus. Now, there are some other structures that we find in eukaryotic cells as well that we do not find in prokaryotic cells, but the number one thing I think that you should think about in your mind is that eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells also usually are much larger than prokaryotic cells, usually about 10 times larger on average than your average prokaryotic cell. And most eukaryotes are multicellular. So when I talk about eukaryotes, again, these are organisms whose cells are eukaryotic or whose cells have a nucleus. And most eukaryotes are multicellular organisms, not single-celled organisms. If you recall, all prokaryotes are single-celled organisms, and we call them generically, we call all prokaryotes bacteria. Okay, so again, multicellular describes organisms whose bodies are made of many cells, and usually we're not just talking about like 10 or 15 cells, we're talking about millions or billions or even trillions of cells. So for example, all plants and animals are multicellular. Most fungi are, although there are some significant examples of fungi that are single-celled organisms, and some protists, although most protists are single-celled organisms. So life processes in eukaryotic cells are mostly carried out in these structures called organelles. So an organelle it's a small structure. The word actually means little organ. Organelle means little organ. There it is. But these are small structures that are contained within the cytoplasm of eukaryotic cells primarily, and they perform specialized functions. They function essentially like little organs in our body, or like organs function in our body. So some examples of organelles are things like the nucleus, which I've already mentioned, and also mitochondria and chloroplasts, which we'll talk about more specifically a little later in this unit. Okay, now for simplicity's sake in this class, we're going to simplify things and talk about really just two basic types of eukaryotic cell. So there's two types of eukaryotic cell that we will focus on in this class. These are animal cells and plant cells. So we're sort of leaving out fungal cells a little bit, but that's okay for the level that we're studying at in 7th grade. Just knowing some of the basic just learning all the basic cell organelles and their functions and where they occur, whether it's in plant cell or animal cell, is generally that's going to be enough for us. And we'll talk about fungal cells maybe a little bit. But so plant and animal cells do have many of the same structures in common, but some of the structures that we find in animal cells and especially in plant cells are unique to that type of cell. So now what we're going to do basically is we're going to go through and really just do a survey or an overview of all these different cell structures and cell organelles, talk about their function and in what types of cells they occur in, whether they occur in animal cells or plant cells or both. Most of them do occur in both. So once again, all eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, and this is really, like I said before, the defining characteristic of eukaryotic cells is the fact that they have a nucleus. So nucleus is a central membrane-bound organelle that manages cellular functions and contains DNA. Now what this means right here, this membrane-bound language here, what that is referring to is the fact that the organelle is surrounded by a membrane, much like the cell itself is surrounded by a membrane. In fact, the membrane is made of the same phospholipid bilayer that we see in the cell membrane that we've already studied a little bit with the introductory unit on cells when we talked about prokaryotic cells. So, but the difference is that in eukaryotes, they have organelles inside the body of the cell that are surrounded by a membrane as well. Not just the cell membrane surrounding the entire cell, but the organelles inside also have their own membranes. So the nucleus is often, the nucleus is like the brain of the eukaryotic cell. So the nucleus directs and controls most cell activities. And this is the way that it does this. Basically, it's really just a storage container for the DNA. The nucleus contains DNA, which we've talked about a little bit. We're not going to get into very much detail about DNA this year. You'll get that in high school when you take biology in high school. But the nucleus contains DNA, and the DNA stores information on how to make the cell's proteins. And as we've already talked about with organic molecules, proteins are the labor force of the cell. They do all the work of the cell. So the nucleus is surrounded by a structure called the nuclear membrane, and that is, again, this lipid bilayer, phospholipid bilayer, similar to what we see on the cell membrane itself. So nuclear membrane is this two-layered structure surrounding a nucleus, but the nuclear membrane, unlike the cell membrane, is filled with holes. It's filled with these pores, as they're called, and this allows materials to flow between the nucleus and the rest of the cell. Primarily what travels through these pores are ribosomes, which are made inside of the nucleus, and our RNA. The messenger RNA will take messages from the DNA that it gets within the nucleus and then travels out of these nuclear pores and brings these messages to the ribosomes that are out in the cytoplasm and basically directs them as to which proteins they should make. The nucleus may also contain another structure, looks kind of like a mini nucleus, called a nucleolus. Okay, so the nucleolus looks like a sort of a smaller nucleus inside of the larger nucleus, but really what it is a mass of condensed DNA that is inside of the nucleus that produces ribosomal RNA. And ribosomal RNA is a type of RNA that contributes to forming the structures of ribosomes that leave the nucleus and function outside of the nucleus in the cytoplasm to make all the proteins that the cell produces. Okay, that's the first organelle that we'll look at in eukaryotic cells. The next organelle that we will look at, sort of a complicated, chaotic looking structure to some degree, and this is called the endoplasmic reticulum. So eukaryotic cells have special structures that control their chemical reactions. And this is where the endoplasmic reticulum comes in. This is an organelle in eukaryotic cells made up of a system of folded membranes which assist in the production, processing, and transport of proteins and lipids. And like I just said, it is a site of chemical reactions in cells. So a lot of chemical reactions you want to have occur under controlled conditions so that the chemical reaction doesn't stray from its primary focus and maybe react with something else that's floating around in the cell. So basically the cell has these structures that it creates that allow chemical reactions to occur in sort of a closed environment or closed space, and that's one of the primary functions of the endoplasmic reticulum, is to provide that space for chemical reactions to occur so they don't spread to other parts of the cell unnecessarily. So when we look at endoplasmic reticulum, you see it is a system of folded membranes. There are two types of endoplasmic reticulum. First, we will look at the rough endoplasmic reticulum and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and these are so named because of their appearance. When we look at them through microscopes, the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, or smooth ER, since endoplasmic reticulum can be a mouthful to say, we can abbreviate that and say ER, smooth ER, and rough ER. Smooth ER appears smooth, rough ER appears rough. Okay. The rough ER appears rough because it has ribosomes embedded or attached to its surface, all along its surface, and these help to make proteins right on the surface of the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The smooth ER appears smooth because it does not have these ribosomes attached to it, and it helps make lipids and also breaks down toxins. So smooth ER has a more directed function to make lipids and to break down toxins. Rough endoplasmic reticulum is more focused on making proteins because it has those ribosomes. And remember, we talked about ribosomes in the previous unit. They're a combination of proteins and ribosomal RNA, and they read messages brought from messenger RNA telling them which proteins to make, and then the proteins go and do the work in the cell. So substances that are made in the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER, then travel to the next structure we'll look at, which is called the Golgi Apparatus, sometimes called the Golgi body, in structures called vesicles. So there's two structures we'll look at here. We have Golgi Apparatus, or Golgi body, and vesicles. Okay, so first we'll look at the vesicles. So once structures are made, molecules are made within the endoplasmic reticulum, within the ER. Oftentimes these organic molecules are placed into these little storage containers that are used to transport these organic molecules where they need to, or to the Golgi apparatus. So these are, we call these vesicles. They're small membrane-bound sacs in the cell, and they're used to transport organic molecules. Now, vesicles, they're made by the endoplasmic reticulum. They actually are formed as little pieces of the endoplasmic reticulum pinch off and surround an organic molecule, and also ultimately the Golgi apparatus makes some vesicles as well, as we'll see. And vesicles look like little bubbles in the cell, as you can see over here in the lower right. The picture of the Golgi apparatus shows all these little round spherical bubble-like structures that we call vesicles, and they contain organic molecules that are either traveling from the endoplasmic reticulum to the Golgi apparatus, or traveling from the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi body, or the Golgi complex to other parts of the cell. So next we'll look at the Golgi body, or the Golgi apparatus. It is a flattened stack of membranes. It looks sort of similar to the endoplasmic reticulum, but it looks much more organized. It's very clearly looks like sort of a stack of these membranes, more condensed, not so spread out and chaotic like the endoplasmic reticulum looks. One of the skills you need to develop is the ability to distinguish between rough ER and smooth ER and the Golgi body, Golgi apparatus, Golgi complex. So again, it's a flattened stack of membranes, and its job is to modify, sort, package, and send out molecules where they need to go in the cell. So the Golgi apparatus sorts and delivers organic molecules, and there's a great analogy for the Golgi apparatus within the cell, and that is it's like the post office of the cell. Sometimes we use analogies for the cell. The organelles within the cell function sort of like entities within a city. The nucleus would be town hall or the mayor's office, governing everything. The Golgi apparatus is the post office. So basically it receives, the post office in Stony Brook receives letters from all over town. It takes those letters and it categorizes them or sorts them into different piles, essentially, and then it sends out those piles where they need to go. You could have multiple letters coming to you from New York, from Alabama, from California. They all come to the post office, and then they're put into one package and then delivered to you. And so the Golgi apparatus does a similar thing for the cell. It receives these organic molecules, sorts them, packages them, and then sends them out in an efficient way to where they need to go within the cell. So it sorts and delivers, like the post office sorts and delivers mail. The Golgi apparatus sorts and delivers organic molecules. Sometimes it's described as looking like a stack of pancakes. Sometimes this works for me, sometimes it doesn't. So if this helps you to remember, then by all means go ahead and use that description to help you recognize the Golgi apparatus. But if it doesn't work, don't worry about it. And again, it's also sometimes called the Golgi complex, also sometimes called the Golgi body. Golgi complex, Golgi apparatus, Golgi body. The key is if you see Golgi, you know what we're talking about.